As we conclude our special coverage of the 50th anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy, we want to go back to what happened exactly 50 years ago today.
This is the basement floor of the Dallas City Hall, and that's a scuffle on the basement floor. It seems to concern photographers.
He has been shot. Oswald has been shot.
Lee Oswald.
Joining us now, Jackie Kennedy's Secret Service agent Clint Hill, author of the new book, 5 Days in November. Mr. Hill, thank you so much for being with us. Well, when that happened, when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald that Sunday, you were already back in Washington because President Johnson, Mrs. Kennedy, all of you had gone back on Air Force One. When you got back to Washington, what did the Secret Service, what was your reaction to hearing that Lee Harvey Oswald had been killed?
Well, we didn't find that out until somewhat later that day, because just as he was being killed, we were in the process of accompanying Mrs. Kennedy and the children and the President, Johnson, taking the President's body up to the U.S. Capitol. So sometime later, and then we were astounded that this had happened because we really wanted to interrogate him. We wanted to find out why. We wanted to see what the motivation was, and we never had that chance.
You know, we now know, especially through the reporting of Phil Sheenan, who has a new book out, that it had been well known that Lee Harvey Oswald had gone to Mexico in the weeks before this had happened. We knew that he had gone to the Soviet embassy there, where he was kind of politely turned away, and he had gone to the Cuban embassy and tried to get a passport or a visa to go to Cuba. And they said, thanks, but no thanks, and sent him on his way. We know from Sheenan's reporting that the CIA and the FBI knew that as he had stormed out of the Cuban embassy, he said, I'm going to kill President Kennedy, as if it was Kennedy's fault he couldn't get a visa to go to Cuba. Did any of you on the President's protective detail know any of that when you came to Dallas?
We had no knowledge of Oswald in any sense. Nobody had told us anything about him.
Do you have any idea why? I mean, you must have wondered about that as the years went by, that why this was never passed on. As a matter of fact, it's my understanding that this information was never passed on to the Warren Commission.
Well, I doubt that it was. I had never heard that he had made that statement, but we had a good relationship with the CIA. We had a fairly good relationship with the Bureau. It was a little strained at times, but we didn't receive any information about Oswald whatsoever.
I still find it very hard to believe. And in fact, we now know through the reporting of the Dallas Times-Herald and their publisher at the time, Tom Johnson, who ran across information in the 70s, it was in the 1970s when he found out that the FBI had actually gotten a threatening note from Lee Harvey Oswald, which he had dropped off at their office. He had been offended, as it were, because they had come to check on his wife, who of course was a Soviet citizen, and he had defected to the Soviet Union. It seems to me, if you all had known that Oswald had made these statements in Mexico, wouldn't it have changed the way you protected the President?
Certainly. It would have changed everything, because the least thing would have happened, he would have been put under protective surveillance. We would have had somebody watching him all the time. But we had no knowledge that he had any interest in the President whatsoever.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point in America where these various agencies, which do such a great job, will do a better job of sharing what they know and cooperating with one another?
Well, I think it has improved. I think, but even through 2011, up in New York, at that time, the information was not being shared. So it's always been a problem. Hopefully it'll get better.
I want to show you an iconic photo that we all know, and it's what we all remember from the funeral that day, and that is little John standing next to his mom, saluting the flag. There it is. To me, that is the thing that sums it up. But you have quite a story about that.
Well, it just didn't happen out of the blue. I mean, when the casket was brought out and placed on the caisson and all the military out there saluted the President, Mrs. Kennedy leaned over and whispered into John's ear. I wasn't sure exactly what she said, but I saw John throw his shoulders back and salute his father. Well, how that developed was early in November, Mrs. Kennedy came to me and said, the president's going to go to Arlington National Cemetery on November 11th to lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. And all the military are going to salute the president at that time, and I'd like John to go with him and learn how to salute and salute his father. Can you think the agents can teach him that? And I said, sure, that's not a problem. So the agents started work with him day after day, but we had a problem. He would only do it with his left hand. Finally, on that date, November 11th, he came with his father, and he did it properly. But then, from that point on, it was back to the left hand. Then the day of the services at the St. Matthew's Cathedral, he got a little rambunctious. Mrs. Kennedy beckoned to the agents that were working with him, and they took him to a side room. They were trying to keep him busy, so they thought they'd have him practice his salute, and he was right back doing it left-handed. There was a Marine colonel standing at the doorway. He saw what was happening. He walked into the room and he said, John, this is how you salute. And he saluted. And I'll be darned. It stuck. Took that colonel about 15 seconds to teach him what we've been trying to teach him for a month. His worked, ours didn't. But that's how he learned how to salute.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Mr. Hill, you're an American hero. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back in a minute with our Face the Nation flashback.